Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we'll be looking at the creation of woman in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25 in our continuing study through the book of Genesis. We looked before about how creation had been complete at the beginning of chapter 2. The heavens and the earth were created. God had finished his work, and then man was created in verses 4 through 9. We have rivers and trees, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, other trees in the garden, also the tree of life, and then the rivers too also are given names. And all these things are named. Then in verse 15, man is assigned the task of guarding and keeping the garden. And finally, the pivotal point we said last time was where the stipulation is given: you can eat from any tree of the garden except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The forbidden fruit is thereby forbidden. Now we come to verse 18, where the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." Notice that it's not good. We had seen back in chapter 1 where on each day God would make something and he would say, and God saw that it was good. He would make something else and it was good. And we got to the end of Genesis chapter 1, and God looked at everything that he'd made and it was very good. But now we read of something that is not good. It's not good for the man to be alone. What we see then here in verse 18 is that it is not good that man should be alone. What we're being told is the need for a companion for the man. And we expect that the next verse would be then God's going to create the woman. But that's not what we see. In verses 19 and 20, instead we see the creation and the naming of the animals. And what that's doing is spotlighting the inadequacy of the animals for this sort of companionship. Dogs are not man's best friend. Man needs a woman, and that's what's going to come about in verses 21-22, where we'll see the creation of the woman, and she will be provided as a companion for the man. Verse 19 then says, "Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature," remember how Adam had been called a living creature, he became a living soul. This is the same term there. What the man called a living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the sky, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a suitable helper for him. And that's the quest. The quest is for a helper that would fit him, a helper that would be suitable for him. So we had that pivotal point, the forbidden fruit. Then man is in need of a helper. It wasn't good for him to be alone. That was in verse 18. We had the animals in the garden that are given names, which corresponds to the trees and the rivers in the garden being given names back in verses 9 through 14. And now finally in verses 21 through 24 we have the creation of the woman corresponding to the creation of man back in verses 4 through 9. Eventually we'll come to the point, verse 25, we'll see creation complete, where the man and woman, they'll be completed, but they'll also be naked, and yet they'll be unashamed in the presence of God. Verse 21 then, "So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept, and then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place." Now I want you to notice these qualities: a deep sleep, and then something is taken from his side. Where else do we see that in the scriptures? And the answer is that when Jesus dies upon the cross, as the Christians often speak of, he slept. After he died upon the cross, you will remember that a Roman guard took a spear and put it into his side. That would have been up under the ribs, as it were. And God did that. Christ went to the cross in order to procure his heavenly bride. And so what we see here is the first Adam being put to sleep, and the Lord takes from his side, from one of his ribs, and closes up the flesh at that place. And the Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man and brought her to the man. And of course Christ has done the same for us. He went to a deep sleep. He went to death, so that from his side, from his very being, the church could be brought forth. And so verse 23, we have a bit of poetry. This is perhaps the first song in the scriptures. And the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called," and it rhymes more in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, she shall be called woman. The Hebrew word for woman is isha, because she was taken out of ish. Ish is the word for man. Isha, that's the word for woman. And she shall be called isha because she was taken out of ish. For this cause, and here's the commentary on that previous verse, for this cause a man shall leave his father and his mother, and they shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Now this isn't Adam saying this, because Adam didn't have a father and mother, but this is the writer, author, Moses, is telling this, explaining the song in the previous verse, that God made man and woman, and that is to be passed on to each man and woman, where again there would be a cleaving and a one flesh relationship. The chapter concludes, verse 25, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Now, that aspect of being not ashamed, to us we just read it and we say, that's nice, that's gentle and it's beautiful. But we're missing something, because we do not live in a honor-shame culture. We live more in a guilt-righteous culture. And that idea of not being ashamed was very special to the original readers of this passage. And of course, the scriptures talk about one who took our shame upon himself. Remember Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 talks about how he went to the cross despising the shame, and yet taking that upon himself so that we might be unashamed before the Lord.